At first light, a sharp, frigid wind sliced through Fort Collins, Colorado. Frost still clung to the low barn roof as Lila Morgan, age 47, unlocked the gate to Heartland Horse Rescue. Her boots crunched on gravel as she moved through the thin mist, breath curling in the air. A sense of unease made her fingertips tingle. She'd run rescues for years, but something about this morning, about the heavy quiet, felt off. Then she saw it. A cardboard box, edges soaked and sagging, lay by the main barn door. Next to it, a young brown mare was collapsed on her side. A torn, mud-stained saddle rag covered her eyes like a blindfold. Raw, bleeding grooves circled her legs, evidence of ropes that had cut deep. Steam rose from her nostrils, each breath visible in the dawn. The metallic tang of blood mixed with the smell of wet hay. A trail of hoof prints, spaced wide and deep, led back toward the empty county road. Lila's hands shook as she crouched beside the mare, heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. Carefully, she peeled the filthy rag from the horse's eyes. Wide, terrified eyes blinked up at her, pupils huge. The horse's entire body trembled. Lila whispered, "Easy, girl." Her voice sounded too loud in the morning stillness. There was a note, crumpled and barely legible, stuck inside the box. "Too wild, broke fences, dangerous, yours if you want." She scanned the driveway. No one in sight, not a soul. Security cameras caught only a battered trailer slipping away in the night. Lila was haunted by last year's disaster, a failed rescue that cost a horse its life and nearly shut down Heartland forever. She'd promised herself, never again, not if it meant risking more heartbreak. Now she stood at another crossroads. Turn away and call the sheriff, or risk everything, including her own sense of hope, for this quivering, beaten animal. Her decision was made the moment she saw those eyes. Lila slipped her arm gently beneath the mare's head. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured. The horse flinched, but didn't fight. Sunrise crept over the mountains, washing the barn in gold. Lila braced, pushing her doubts aside, and helped the mare, Maple, she decided, struggle to her feet. A moment of warmth spread through them both as the light touched their faces. For just a second, it felt like possibility. Inside the barn, Lila coaxed Maple into a thickly bedded stall, careful to avoid sudden movements. She noticed the deep scars, the notched ear, signs of a long, rough past. The rescue's vet, Dr. Sutton, arrived moments later, his breath fogging in the cold. He knelt beside Maple, hands steady but gentle. "These wounds, they're not just from tonight. She's been through months of this." Lila found herself clutching the note, the edges crumbling in her fist. Her voice broke as she read it aloud, the words heavy as stones. Maple jolted from every touch, nearly kicking the stall door. The raw panic in the horse's eyes mirrored something old and wounded inside Lila, a part of her that had never really healed. Outside, the day brightened, but inside, it felt like dusk. Who would do this to a horse, and why abandon her here, at Heartland? Was Maple running from something, or was she searching for the one place she remembered as safe? Despite every warning in her head, Lila made her choice. She would foster Maple at her own private stable. The road to recovery would be long, months at least, but Lila couldn't turn away. Not again. Not when she knew what it was to be lost. She spread fresh hay and laid down a faded blue blanket, one from the early days of Heartland, before the failures, before the scars. As Maple hobbled around the stall, a shaft of morning light spilled across her brown coat, turning it golden. For the first time, the mare didn't shy from the food. She took a handful of oats, muzzle quivering, but ate. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds. Lila watched Maple settle, exhaustion overtaking fear. She sat in the straw, listening to the barn fill with quiet, just the gentle snuffle of a horse who maybe had found the start of safety. The big questions lingered, unsolved. Who had hurt Maple? Could trust be rebuilt from nothing? And was Lila herself ready to try again? But for that moment, hope slipped in with the sunlight. A broken horse, a broken woman, side by side at the dawn, both daring to believe in second chances. The wind picked up just after sunrise, rattling the barn doors and stirring up a nervous energy that seemed to seep into every stall. Lila barely slept after Maple's arrival. Instead, she kept watch from the office window, eyes drawn again and again to the bay mare, whose presence had shifted the entire atmosphere of Heartland Horse Rescue. Dr. Sutton returned early, his truck crunching the gravel as he carried in his vet kit and a quiet resolve. "Let's see what we're dealing with," he said, voice low so as not to spook the other horses. Lila followed, her stomach tight with dread. She'd seen injured animals before. Neglect, even cruelty, was not new to her. But the jagged marks on Maple's legs and the haunted look in her eyes made this feel different. Inside the stall, Maple froze at their approach. Every muscle in her body was taut as wire, head pressed into the farthest corner, eyes fixed on Lila like she was both lifeline and threat. Dr. Sutton knelt, whispering soothing nonsense as he checked her wounds. "Easy, girl. You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you now." Lila noticed Maple's flanks twitching at every word. The rope burns were fresh and angry, skin split, the edges red and swollen. But there were deeper marks, old scars running across her chest and shoulders, faded but unmistakable. Her left ear bore a notch, poorly healed. Dr. Sutton traced his gloved finger along the pattern of scars, shaking his head. "Some of these are months old. She's been in trouble for a long time." Lila's heart clenched. "How could someone do this?" she whispered. She remembered the note, still balled in her coat pocket, its message raw and cruel. "Too wild, broke fences, dangerous, yours if you want." She fought the urge to crumple it further, to throw it away. But she needed it. Proof for the sheriff and animal control, proof that Maple hadn't just appeared out of thin air. As Dr. Sutton tended to Maple's wounds, Lila stepped outside, phone in hand. She pulled up the rescue security footage, grainy, black and white. There, just before dawn, a battered two-horse trailer backed up to the barn. A figure, face obscured by a hood, led the blindfolded mare out, dragging her by a frayed rope. The person glanced around, then hurried back into the truck and sped off. The video left a sick feeling in Lila's gut. There was nothing she could use to track the culprit, no clear license plate, no telling features. She showed the footage to her lead volunteer, Miguel, who'd come in early to help with chores. Miguel squinted at the video. "I've heard rumors," he said. "There's a ranch east of town, Edgewood, I think. People say horses go in and never come out. Folks keep quiet about it, but I could ask around." "See what you can learn," Lila said, gratitude flickering through her exhaustion. Back in the barn, Dr. Sutton finished bandaging Maple's wounds. "We need to keep her movement limited. She's got injuries at all stages of healing, Lila. And she's terrified. Don't push her, not yet." Lila nodded, her mind already working through routines, gentle handling, plenty of quiet, all the tricks she'd learned to rebuild a broken animal's trust. But this time, it felt like more than just a job. It felt personal. She spent hours that morning trying to comfort Maple, soft words, slow movements, small treats. Still, every time she reached out, Maple shied away, muscles rippling in fear. Once, Maple kicked at the stall door, the sound echoing down the barn aisle like a gunshot. Lila winced but didn't retreat. She kept her voice calm. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you." As noon came and went, Lila sat just outside the stall, reading the note again. Her voice caught when she read it aloud, and she was startled by the way Maple's ears flicked at the sound. It was as if the mare recognized something in Lila's broken tone, something that mirrored her own fear. Miguel returned with coffee and more bad news. "That ranch. It's bad, Lila. People dump horses there when they don't want them. Some get sold at auction, some just disappear. I'll keep digging." "Thank you," she said, voice thin. She rubbed her temples, fighting the migraine that always came with this kind of stress. Through it all, the question gnawed at her. Was Maple running to escape the cruelty, or was she searching for something, some memory of safety, some person or place that meant hope? The notched ear, the collection of wounds, the way Maple watched every move with wild, desperate eyes, none of it made sense unless you'd lived it yourself. By late afternoon, Maple let Lila approach with a handful of oats. It wasn't trust, not yet, but hunger outweighed fear. For a moment, as the sun dipped behind the barn, a slant of golden light made Maple's brown coat shine. Lila found herself smiling, just a little. That evening, as the barn quieted and the other horses settled, Lila called animal control and filed a report. She took a deep breath and called the sheriff too. The system was slow, but she wouldn't let this case disappear, not like so many before. Finally, Lila made a choice that would shape the months ahead. She'd keep Maple at her private stable. No adoption, no risk of another careless owner. She would invest all the time Maple needed, no matter how long it took. As darkness settled, Lila sat by the stall, fatigue pressing down on her. Maple stood quietly, eyes half closed, and ate from Lila's palm. For the first time since her arrival, the mare didn't flinch at Lila's touch. Outside, the wind softened. Inside, hope flickered. Both horse and woman had scars, some old, some painfully fresh, but tonight, the long road to healing had finally begun. That evening, the sky over Fort Collins faded from gold to a somber blue. Lila lingered in the barn long after the last volunteer had gone home, listening to the restless shuffles and soft snorts of the horses settling in for the night. The world outside fell silent except for the wind sifting through the cottonwoods, rattling a loose sign by the gate. Inside, every creak and distant coyote call seemed magnified. Lila prepared Maple's stall with extra bedding, spreading it thick, hoping to make her feel safe. She dimmed the overhead bulb to soften the shadows. The barn itself smelled of sweet hay and old wood, laced with a hint of antiseptic from Maple's recent bandages. Lila carried a faded blanket, a blue one with white fringe, frayed at the corners. It once belonged to her old horse, Daisy, the one she'd lost during a brutal spring storm the year after her divorce. She paused at the stall door, fingers tracing the edge of the blanket, remembering the comfort it had brought her during sleepless nights. Maple stood rigid in the far corner, body tense and eyes fixed on Lila's every move. The mare's breathing was shallow, quick, her chest rising and falling in short bursts. She circled the stall restlessly, hooves whispering across the straw, then stopped, facing into the darkest corner, head lowered. Lila saw the shiver ripple across Maple's shoulders. Every time a distant noise echoed, a car door slamming, a stray dog barking, Maple's ears darted, and her whole frame jerked like she was bracing for another blow. Lila settled onto a straw bale a few feet away from the stall, just far enough not to threaten but close enough to offer company. She exhaled slowly, forcing her body to relax, but the old ache in her chest refused to fade. This place, this barn, was her sanctuary after the world had torn her apart. After her marriage collapsed, after Daisy's death, after last year's failed rescue nearly closed Heartland for good. She'd learned to survive in silence. Maybe that's why she felt so drawn to Maple. Two creatures hollowed by loss, both standing on the thin edge between hope and surrender. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance with gentle words or a soft touch. But she remembered how even kindness could be frightening to the wounded. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in years. She hummed. Soft, shaky at first, then steadier. An old lullaby her mother sang when nights seemed endless. The notes filled the barn, mingling with the quiet rustle of hay. Maple's ears pricked forward. She stopped pacing, one hoof raised, listening. The big brown eyes found Lila's face, wide and uncertain, searching for meaning in the unfamiliar sound. For a few breaths, they simply watched each other, an unspoken question passing between them. Are you safe? Can I trust you? Lila's heart ached with longing. She thought of the loneliness that followed her divorce, the nights she'd curled up with Daisy's blanket, wishing for someone to share the silence. She wondered if Maple, too, was remembering a gentler life, maybe a pasture or the touch of a person who once meant safety. Or maybe Maple's memories were all sharp and raw, shadows flickering with pain. The barn felt impossibly big that night. Every empty stall, every shadowed beam, every echo of hoof on wood, Lila felt them all pressing in. Yet she stayed, just humming, letting the music wrap around them both. Eventually, fatigue claimed her. She stood, joints stiff, and placed the blanket inside the stall. Maple shied away, nostrils flaring, then crept back, drawn by the familiar scent of hay and something softer. The mare nosed the blanket, sniffing it with delicate uncertainty, then lowered herself, awkwardly, painfully, onto the bedding. For the first time since she arrived, Maple folded her legs and rested her head beside the blue fabric, eyes drifting closed for a few brief moments. Lila lingered a while longer, watching. The silence felt different now, not empty, but full of cautious hope. She whispered, "Good night, Maple," barely trusting herself to say more. She turned off the barn lights and walked back to the house. The cold bit at her cheeks, but inside, she felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. Maple's image stayed with her, the mare curled on the blanket, sleep just beginning to ease the fear from her bones. Later, Lila lay in her own bed, sleep slow to come. Her mind wandered through the events of the day, each memory edged with guilt and worry. Had she done enough? Would Maple ever trust her? Was she strong enough to carry the weight of another broken soul? She remembered her own years of silence, the feeling of waking up alone, the quiet ache that seemed to last forever. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Maple's hesitant surrender, the brief moment when the mare let her guard down, found comfort in the presence of another, and dared to rest. That image stayed with her, a fragile thread connecting their wounded hearts. In the barn, Maple slept. In the house, Lila finally drifted off, the lullaby echoing through her dreams. Somewhere between fear and hope, two survivors kept each other company, learning that sometimes the first step toward healing was simply sharing the silence. That night, the darkness didn't feel quite so heavy. For both horse and human, it was the beginning of something new, a quiet promise that even in loneliness, connection was possible. And in the deepest hours before dawn, a battered mare and a weary woman both found the courage to hope again. Morning arrived with soft light spilling through the gaps in the old barn's siding, dust motes swirling in the sunbeams. Lila was up before the alarm, her heart heavy but resolute. She wrapped herself in a thick sweater, the sleeves patched from years of chores, and poured a mug of coffee that she barely touched. Today, everything had to be slower, softer than usual. She entered the barn quietly, careful not to let her boots thump against the floorboards. Maple stood in her stall, ears flicked back, eyes following Lila's every movement. The blue blanket was crumpled in a corner, a small, almost invisible sign that the mare had shifted during the night but returned to its comfort. Lila felt a tug in her chest. Progress, however faint. The first task was routine. Lila spoke in a gentle, even voice as she prepared Maple's feed, describing every step. "I'm just opening the oats now. Here comes some fresh water." She kept her movements deliberate and predictable, remembering every lesson learned from years of working with frightened animals. Trauma lived in the sudden and the unexpected. Healing required rhythm, predictability, and the patience to wait for trust to surface. After breakfast, Lila pulled an old portable radio from the tack room and set it by Maple's stall, tuning into a local station that played country and folk in the mornings. Soft guitar and gentle voices filled the space, blending with the quiet munching of hay. She read aloud from a weathered paperback novel, her words more for the atmosphere than the story, just background comfort, a reminder that kindness could be as simple as company. Each day became a study in observation. Lila noted every tiny change, the way Maple's ears moved, the tension in her jaw, the places she avoided. Loud sounds, a dropped bucket, the sudden slam of a door, sent her into a panic, eyes rolling, hooves striking out. Quick gestures or any man's voice made her freeze or bolt to the farthest corner. Lila charted all of it in a notebook, the pages filling with scribbled insights. Prefers left side. Tolerates soft humming, apples accepted, carrots rejected, fearful of loud laughter. The first breakthrough was almost accidental. Lila cut up an apple into small slices, holding one out on her open palm. Maple sniffed the air, nostrils quivering, eyes wary. The mare edged forward, stretching her neck, lips trembling. After a long, tense minute, she nipped the apple from Lila's hand, pulling back so quickly she nearly lost her balance. But she didn't bolt. She chewed, ears flicking uncertainly, then looked at Lila again. Lila smiled, a warmth blooming in her chest. She didn't reach for more. Instead, she sat cross-legged outside the stall, humming softly, letting Maple decide the pace. That became their ritual. Lila reading, humming, or just sitting in silence, and Maple slowly inching closer, sometimes resting her chin on the top rail of the stall, eyes drifting closed. One afternoon, while Lila brushed the other horses, she noticed Maple watching from her stall, following the movements, ears pricked. Later, Lila entered with a soft brush in hand. She moved slowly, letting Maple see and smell it. After some hesitation, Maple allowed Lila to gently stroke her mane, just a few passes before shying away. But she returned to the spot, breathing in Lila's scent, soaking up the quiet reassurance. At night, Lila journaled about second chances. She wrote of the patience needed to rebuild trust, how both animals and people carried invisible wounds, and how healing couldn't be forced or hurried. She remembered her first pony, Scout, an unwanted gelding saved from auction. How that horse, wild-eyed and misunderstood, had taught her the slow work of connection. The lessons echoed now, decades later, as she tried to reach Maple's hidden heart. There were setbacks, too. One evening, the wind howled, rattling a loose panel on the barn roof. Maple started, eyes wide, body pressed flat against the wall. Lila stayed, quietly reading until the storm passed, her presence the only anchor in the chaos. But trust, when it finally came, arrived quietly and unexpectedly. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in lavender and gold, Lila knelt in the straw, hands open. Maple inched forward, nostrils quivering. She touched her nose to Lila's palm, then, tentative, trembling, rested her chin on Lila's shoulder. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt of wonder through them both. Lila didn't move. She barely breathed. Maple's eyes fluttered closed for a heartbeat before she drew back, uncertainty flickering in her body, but she did not retreat to the corner. That night, as Lila hummed the old lullaby, Maple nuzzled the blue blanket, curling beside it as if it were a promise of gentler times. Lila watched from the stall door, tears stinging her eyes, tears not of grief, but of gratitude. For the first time in years, Lila slept deeply. The barn was quiet, the night calm. Maple's breath was slow and even, the rise and fall of her chest a small miracle against all odds. In the morning, Lila found Maple waiting by the gate, ears forward, eyes soft. She ran her hand along the mare's neck, feeling the tension give way to warmth. The healing had begun, not as a sudden leap, but as a gentle unfolding, day by day, touch by touch. For two souls battered by loss, the fragile beginnings of trust were everything. And though the road ahead would be long, Lila felt hope rooting in her bones, a quiet certainty that together they could find their way back to wholeness, one small connection at a time. After 2 months, early summer had come to Fort Collins. The snow was long gone, replaced by cool mornings and sun-warmed afternoons. The hills beyond Heartland Horse Rescue rolled green beneath the sky, wildflowers blooming in ditches and the scent of cut grass drifting across the pastures. For Lila and Maple, these weeks were marked by a cautious hope, a kind of fragile routine where fear still hovered, but trust grew inch by inch. Maple had grown stronger, her coat now glossy under Lila's careful attention. The raw grooves from rope burns had mostly healed. Each day, Lila extended the boundaries of Maple's world. First, leading her out to the tiny paddock behind the barn, then to a small grassy enclosure lined with safe, sturdy fencing. Lila made sure no sharp objects remained. She checked the perimeter again and again. Each outing was a slow, careful process, always accompanied by quiet conversation and a pocketful of sliced apples. Lila never forgot that trust could break in an instant. She watched Maple for every tremor, every flick of an ear. But there were good days, days when Maple followed her lead line willingly, head low, eyes soft, pausing to nuzzle Lila's sleeve. Other days were harder, the mare spooking at a sudden movement, darting to the far end of the pen, muscles bunched as if she might leap the fence and vanish. On a breezy Saturday, Lila decided Maple was ready for a little more freedom. She opened the gate to the larger pasture, still fully enclosed, and let Maple trot out, muscles rippling, tail arched with tentative joy. Lila leaned against the fence, heart thumping, a bittersweet pride swelling inside her. It felt like progress. It felt like hope. But as dusk settled over Heartland, something changed. A motorcycle, its engine screaming, tore down the county road beyond the trees. The roar shattered the calm, echoing off the barn walls. Maple's head snapped up. Her body coiled, panic surging through every muscle. In an instant, the old terror was back. No barn, no blanket, no Lila. Just noise and fear, and the memory of pain. Maple bolted. She galloped the length of the fence, eyes wild, sweat glistening on her flanks. Lila shouted, voice lost in the wind, and raced to the gate. But Maple didn't see her. She charged the far side of the pasture, gathered herself, and jumped, clearing the top rail but catching her hind leg on the barbed wire hidden in the overgrown grass. Lila heard the sickening thud and the desperate, high-pitched scream. She sprinted after Maple, flashlight bouncing in her hand, rain beginning to spit from a darkening sky. Her boots slipped in the mud. She called Maple's name over and over, voice cracking with fear and guilt. Each step carried the weight of her own memories. The last failed rescue, the horses she'd lost, the knowledge that she might have pushed Maple too soon. The night stretched long and merciless. Lila followed a trail of blood and trampled grass, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. Lightning flickered on the horizon, thunder rolling closer. She found Maple just before dawn, tangled in a thicket at the edge of a neighbor's pasture, her body shaking, breath ragged. The mare's left hind leg was sliced and bleeding, mud and blood caked to the wound. She tried to stand as Lila approached, then collapsed, too exhausted and terrified to run. Lila fell to her knees beside Maple. Her hands trembled as she stroked the mare's mane, whispering apologies into the morning silence. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have let you out. I'm so sorry." Tears streamed down Lila's face, mixing with the rain and dirt. Maple turned her head, pressing her nose into Lila's lap, an act of trust in the midst of pain, a choice to lean into comfort rather than flee. She bandaged Maple's leg as best she could, then called Dr. Sutton with shaking hands. Together, they coaxed Maple back to the barn, step by agonizing step. The vet cleaned and stitched the wound, gave her painkillers and antibiotics. He shook his head, worry etched in every line of his face. "She's lucky she didn't break anything. She'll need stall rest for weeks. Lila, you did everything right." Some wounds take longer to heal than others. For her, fear is always just beneath the surface. The news spread quickly through the small community. A neighbor, old Mr. Beecham, stopped by with a thermos of strong coffee. "Saw your mare last night," he told Lila, voice gruff but kind. "She was circling the barn gate before she went down. Wouldn't let anyone near her. Just kept coming back to your place over and over." That detail landed hard for Lila. Maple hadn't just been running away from fear. She'd been trying, in her confusion, to get back to the one place she felt safe. The realization shook Lila to her core. Her eyes stung, but she managed a grateful nod. The days that followed were hard. Maple's legs swelled, her movements slow and stiff. Some nights, pain made her restless, kicking at the stall walls, sweat darkening her coat. Lila never left her for long, sleeping in a folding chair in the aisle, reading aloud, humming lullabies, offering quiet reassurance. She washed Maple's wound with gentle hands, always apologizing, always promising, "You're safe. I'm here." One night, as Lila cleaned the wound, Maple leaned her head heavily into Lila's lap. It was a moment of surrender, fragile, beautiful, profound. The horse who had known only running, who had never trusted anyone, chose Lila in her hour of pain. That was when Lila understood. Healing was not about never falling, but about where you chose to return when the world turned dark. Maple was learning, slowly, to run towards safety instead of away from fear. Outside, summer deepened. Inside the barn, two battered souls found a new rhythm, a little less afraid, a little more together, with each passing day. Maple's world shrank to the barn. For weeks after the night run, she moved only within the gentle borders of her stall. The injury on her hind leg required constant attention, cleansing, ointments, fresh bandages that Lila changed by the soft light of dawn and again before bed. The entire barn seemed to slow down, the other horses quieting in a kind of unspoken sympathy. Lila, bone-tired but steady, spent hours each day sitting by Maple's side, reading aloud or just humming, keeping a steady, reassuring presence. At first, Maple's healing was slow. Her appetite dipped, then returned. Her wound wept, then began to scab over, pink and raw but clean. Lila tracked every sign of progress. The way Maple started to put weight on her leg, the day she nickered softly at the sight of her breakfast, the way her eyes, still wary, began to linger on Lila a little longer with each visit. There was still pain, but it had shifted, not only in Maple's body, but in her spirit. One evening, Lila sat in her usual spot outside Maple's stall, reading a battered paperback when she heard a car pull up. She tucked her bookmark in and went to the drive, finding a tall woman in jeans and boots, her black hair twisted into a braid. She carried a soft smile and a calmness that seemed to settle the dust in the air. "Mrs. Singh," Lila greeted, recognizing her as the local equine therapist who volunteered with children in town. Mrs. Singh nodded. "Miguel told me about Maple. I wondered if you'd mind me stopping by." "Not at all. She's inside." They moved quietly down the barn aisle, Mrs. Singh's steps slow, her eyes kind. She stopped outside Maple's stall, watching as the mare shifted, alert but not panicked. "She's sensitive," Mrs. Singh said, voice barely above a whisper. "You know, horses like her, when they finally trust, can be a gift to children with anxiety. The very things that make her cautious are what make her special." Lila absorbed that, holding the idea close. "I never thought Maple could help someone else," she admitted. "I just wanted her to feel safe." Mrs. Singh gave her a knowing look. "Often, that's where the best healers begin." A few days later, a neighboring rancher, Mr. Jameson, stopped by with hay. He'd heard about Maple's escape and injury, and after some conversation over coffee in the tack room, he offered another piece of Maple's story. "She belonged to a friend of mine, old Bill Taylor. Sweetest man you'd meet. Died suddenly last year. After that, Maple was passed from one owner to the next, folks who didn't have the time or patience for her. Each one called her difficult, wild, even. But Bill's girl, she loved that horse, taught her tricks, took her everywhere." Lila listened, heart aching as the missing pieces fell into place. Maple hadn't always been lost. Once she was adored, but grief and change had made her a stranger, shuffled from home to home, punished for her fears. The notched ear, the scars, each mark was a chapter of abandonment. That night, Lila knelt beside Maple and whispered, "You will never be abandoned again, no matter what." Her promise settled over them like a blessing. Days stretched into weeks. By now it was early summer. The air was sweet with clover, the meadows around Heartland alive with bees. Maple's wound closed at last, a thin scar mapping the memory of her run, but her limp remained, a reminder of the night fear chased her past safety's edge. Lila accepted it for what it was, a scar, not a weakness, a lesson learned together. Lila introduced Maple to new rituals. She started gentle stretches with Mrs. Singh's guidance, massaging the mare's shoulders, encouraging her to walk small circles in the stall. She brushed Maple's mane with long, even strokes, letting the quiet build a trust no words could buy. Maple, for her part, responded, leaning into touch, pressing her nose into Lila's palm, sometimes resting her head against Lila's chest in the hush of late evening. One day, Mrs. Singh brought a small group of children to the barn. Among them was a shy boy named Tyler, whose voice rarely rose above a whisper. Lila watched as Maple stood quietly while Tyler, trembling, brushed her shoulder. The boy's eyes widened with wonder as Maple nuzzled his hand, her breath warm and gentle. Mrs. Singh smiled, catching Lila's gaze. "See?" she whispered. "She's already helping." The barn came alive with cautious hope. Volunteers returned, inspired by Maple's resilience. Miguel mended the fences, making the paddocks safer than ever. Dr. Sutton checked on Maple's recovery, offering new advice and always ending with, "She's lucky she found you, Lila." Maple, still wary of loud sounds and unfamiliar people, found comfort in routine and in Lila's unwavering presence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the world gold, Lila wrote in her journal, "Maple's healing is changing me too. I used to believe broken things could only be mended. But maybe, with enough patience, they can become something stronger, something beautiful." That night, Lila sat in the stall with Maple, humming their lullaby. The barn doors opened to the warm summer air. The ache in Lila's heart had softened, replaced by gratitude. She knew the journey wasn't finished. The past left deep marks and setbacks would come. But for now, there was safety and the first glimmers of something like belonging. Maple's eyes closed as Lila sang, her body relaxed in the straw. For the first time since her arrival, the line between survivor and sanctuary blurred. Here, in this quiet place, two battered souls began to discover not just healing, but the possibility of a new life, together, and maybe, someday, for others as well. A thunderstorm rolled in late one afternoon, bringing with it a strange, heavy stillness. Lila watched from the porch as dark clouds gathered over the Colorado plains, the wind bending the tall grass and rattling the barn windows. She could feel the tension in the air, a storm not just in the sky but inside her own chest. Maple, for days now, had seemed quieter, haunted by something Lila couldn't name, a restlessness that made her pace her stall and flinch at every distant sound. Mrs. Singh called as the first thunder cracked. "I've done some asking around," she said. "If you're willing, I think we should visit the last ranch where Maple lived. Maybe we can find out what really happened to her." Lila hesitated, memories of Maple's wounds and fear twisting in her gut. But answers were necessary. "Let's go," she agreed, her voice steady. The next morning, the storm spent. Lila and Mrs. Singh drove out along a winding road to the edge of Larimer County. They found the ranch easily enough, a sagging fence, windows broken, the paint faded and peeling from the old farmhouse. The place felt abandoned by hope, a graveyard for forgotten dreams. Tack hung from rusted hooks in the barn, feed buckets lay overturned in the dust, and the smell of old hay clung to the air. Inside, they found a retired stable hand, a stooped man named Gus. He sat on an upturned bucket, boots worn to the sole, his lined face kind but tired. When Lila explained why they'd come, Gus sighed and looked away, sadness clouding his features. "She was the best horse in the barn once," he said, voice rough with regret. "Belonged to the rancher's daughter, Maddie. That girl loved Maple more than anything, taught her tricks, braided her mane, used to sleep in the stall on cold nights. Then the drought hit. Maddie's family lost everything. They sold the ranch, and Maple was passed along like a burden nobody wanted. Each place she went, folks called her skittish, hard to handle. No one understood she was just scared, missing her girl." Lila's throat tightened. All those months she'd spent blaming herself for not reaching Maple sooner. She realized she was just the latest in a line of people who hadn't seen the pain for what it was. She thought of the notched ear, the rope burns, the jumpiness, the legacy of being abandoned again and again by those meant to care. "Did Maddie ever try to find her?" Mrs. Singh asked. Gus nodded. "She looked, but when you got no money and nowhere to go, the world just shuts its doors. Maddie left town, I heard. Broke her heart." The ride back to Heartland was quiet, the car filled with unspoken grief. Lila pressed her hand to the window, watching the miles unspool. She felt guilt and compassion mingling inside her, the weight of Maple's journey settling on her shoulders. She promised herself she'd do better. From now on, Maple would know only gentleness and home. When they returned, Lila found Maple waiting by the fence, eyes bright, head held a little higher than usual. Something in her posture had shifted, a trace of confidence showing through the layers of wariness. Lila stepped into the pasture, and to her surprise, Maple walked toward her. No halter, no coaxing. just a simple act of trust. Maple pressed her nose into Lila's hand, then followed her all the way back to the barn, close enough to brush Lila's sleeve with her whiskers. That night, the sky darkened again, heavy with a new storm. As thunder rumbled and rain battered the roof, Lila moved quickly through the barn, checking on every horse. She reached Maple's stall just as a crack of lightning split the sky. For a heartbeat, Lila braced herself for panic. She expected Maple to bolt or kick, to tremble in the shadows, but instead, Maple stepped forward, trembling but steady, and pressed her head against Lila's shoulder. Lila wrapped her arms around the mare's neck. She felt the shudder that ran through Maple's body and kept whispering, "You're safe. I'm here. I promise." Outside, the storm raged, but inside, something profound shifted. Maple chose comfort over escape. She stayed by Lila's side, trusting her presence more than her instinct to run. Through the storm, they stood together, two survivors weathering a night that could have broken either of them, but instead sealed their bond. Lila realized the real healing wasn't in teaching Maple not to be afraid, but in showing her that, even in fear, she wouldn't be left alone. By morning, the world had changed. The sun rose over Heartland, the air washed clean and new. Maple grazed quietly in the pasture, lifting her head whenever Lila called her name. She followed Lila from stall to stall, a shadow of gentleness where there had once been only flight. Lila looked at Maple and saw not a project or a victim, but a soul as wounded and as strong as her own. In the weeks since the injury, since the thunder and rain, trust had grown roots in their shared silences. The distance that had separated them, carved by years of loss and misunderstanding, was closing. Where there had been only scars, there was now connection. And Lila knew, as surely as the new day brightened the sky, that Maple's story wasn't about being broken. It was about returning, again and again, to the possibility of love, even after the world tried to teach you otherwise. The journey wasn't finished. But for the first time, both Lila and Maple believed they were finally, truly home. Summer's heart beat steadily across the fields of Heartland, but for Lila, every warm breeze carried a whisper of uncertainty. Word of Maple's transformation had traveled fast in the local horse community. Parents called asking about lessons or gentle horses for their anxious children. A few even came to visit, hoping their family might be the right fit for Maple. Lila listened, always with a protective ache, knowing how fragile the trust they'd built was, and how quickly a change in hands could undo everything. It was on a bright Saturday when the Carter family arrived. The parents, Karen and Michael, came with their 9-year-old daughter, Clara, a small, quiet child with long, tangled hair and the kind of shy, inward gaze Lila recognized too well. Clara hardly spoke, hiding behind her mother as they walked the barn aisle. Maple, grazing in the nearest paddock, raised her head as if sensing the visitor's nerves. "Clara's had a rough year," Karen confided softly to Lila while Michael listened nearby. "We were hoping a gentle horse might help her open up again." Lila hesitated, feeling a tangle of hope and dread. She led the family to Maple's paddock, speaking in a low, reassuring voice. "Maple's a special soul. She's been through a lot, just like Clara. She can be nervous, but she's gentle when she feels safe." Clara watched from the gate, clutching her mother's hand. Maple approached at her own pace, slow and deliberate. For a moment, horse and child simply regarded one another, two cautious hearts measuring the world from behind their defenses. "Would you like to brush her?" Lila asked, kneeling beside Clara, keeping her own movements slow. Clara nodded, barely, and Lila handed her a soft brush. She showed Clara how to move gently, just behind Maple's shoulder, and watched as the girl's thin arms trembled with nervousness. Maple stood very still, ears flicked back in quiet concentration. Clara whispered something too soft for anyone else to hear, her lips barely moving. The brush slid through Maple's mane, long strokes as the dust and anxiety fell away together. Karen wiped a tear, and even Michael, stoic and watchful, seemed to breathe easier. "She's never been this calm with an animal," Karen whispered. The visit stretched long and gentle. Clara brushed Maple, spoke softly, and even laid her cheek against the mare's shoulder for a brief, fragile moment. Lila watched every interaction, her heart twisting with hope and fear. Would this be Maple's new family? Could she let her go? But as the afternoon wore on, trouble brewed at the edges of their peace. From the county highway, a distant siren wailed, a fire truck or ambulance racing through town. Maple's body stiffened, her head rising, muscles tensing beneath Clara's hand. Lila felt the old fear surge, and for a moment she was terrified Maple would bolt, shattering all their progress. Instead, Maple pressed her nose into Lila's chest, eyes wide but steady, trembling against her. Lila wrapped her arms around Maple's neck, murmuring soft reassurances. Clara stepped back, unsure, and Lila felt the sharp ache of the moment, how quickly everything could slip away. But Maple did not run. She stood with Lila until the siren faded into the distance, breathing harder but never breaking away. When Maple finally relaxed, she turned and gently nuzzled Clara's hand as if to say, "I know what it's like to be scared." Karen watched, her eyes bright with gratitude and sadness. "I think Maple already has the home she needs, Lila," she said softly. "We'll look at some of your other horses, but this is something special." Relief and loss washed over Lila all at once. She smiled, blinking back tears, and thanked the Carters for understanding. Clara hugged Maple's neck before leaving, and Maple, in her quiet way, stood calmly, her head lowered in acceptance. After the Carters left, Lila led Maple out to the open pasture for the first time since her injury. The mare walked with only the faintest limp now. Lila slipped off the lead rope, her heart pounding. Would Maple stay, or would the world's old ghosts call her back to running? Maple stood for a long moment, surveying the open sky. Then, with a deep, contented sigh, she lowered her head to graze, her body loose and at peace. Lila watched, the tears coming now, this time not from grief but from a hard-won joy. Maple was home, not just sheltered, not just safe, but truly home. That evening, Lila planted a willow sapling by the main gate, a living marker for all the horses who had come and gone, and for the beginnings Maple had found here. As she pressed the soil around its roots, she whispered a promise to the tree and to Maple, who stood nearby watching. "You'll never be lost again." Night settled over Heartland, and for the first time, Lila left the pasture gate open. She stood in the barn doorway, watching Maple sleep beneath the stars, her brown coat glowing in the moonlight, finally free from the prison of her past. Inside, the house was quiet, but Lila's heart was full. The next day, other families would come, other horses would find their own places of belonging. But tonight, under the vast Colorado sky, Lila understood what it meant to give not just shelter, but a true sense of home. Maple, survivor and teacher, had claimed her place, not as a lesson in pain, but as a living testament to healing, trust, and the quiet triumph of coming home. And beyond the barn, the willow's new leaves trembled in the wind, a silent promise that second chances were real, and that love, when patient, always finds a way. The summer days slipped gently into fall. The grass in the paddocks faded from vibrant green to gold, and the evenings carried a soft chill that crept under the barn doors. Life at Heartland had settled into a rhythm, but for Lila and Maple, everything felt quietly changed, transformed not by a single act, but by the slow, patient process of healing. By now, Maple's limp was hardly noticeable. The scar on her hind leg remained, a thin silver crescent beneath her coat, but she moved with a new confidence, tail swishing, eyes clear. She was no longer the horse who flinched from every sound or shadow. Something in her had opened, softened, and grown. It started with the children. Mrs. Singh's group came twice a week, children from the local school, some shy, some loud, all carrying burdens far heavier than their years. Maple became their anchor, the first to greet them at the gate, her manner calm and steady. The children learned to brush her, to lead her quietly around the ring. She moved slowly with the most frightened, patient with every mistake. More than once, Lila saw a child rest their forehead against Maple's neck, whispering secrets into the soft brown fur, as if the mare could take their fears and lock them safely away. Word spread, and soon veterans from the local VA center began to visit. Some came with walkers, some with scars invisible but deep. Lila watched as grown men and women, tough, guarded, stood silent in Maple's presence, letting the gentle horse's calm seep into their bones. Maple, sensing their hesitance, offered her trust freely but never demanded it. She simply stood beside them, breathing in sync, teaching by example that wounds didn't have to be hidden in order to be honored. Heartland began to change as well. Lila found herself opening the doors wider, inviting not just volunteers, but the whole community. She organized equine therapy days, open barn afternoons where anyone could come, sit in the sun, brush a horse, and maybe find a piece of themselves they'd forgotten. The barn filled with new sounds, children's laughter, quiet conversation, the steady rhythm of hooves in sand. Maple, once the most broken, became the barn's silent teacher. Lila saw how she approached the anxious first, stepping close, lowering her head to their level, giving them space until they were ready. She never rushed, never demanded affection. Even the most fearful eventually found the courage to reach out, their hands trembling, their voices soft. Maple responded with warmth, pressing her nose into their palms, accepting their trust as gently as she had learned to accept Lila's. For Lila, the transformation was just as profound. She began to see her own story reflected in Maple's, a history of scars, of running, of loss, but also of survival. Every day she wrote in her journal, recording Maple's progress and her own. One night, after a long session with a group of foster kids, she wrote, "Maple taught me that healing means honoring the scars, not hiding them. True belonging isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about feeling safe enough to come home again and again, no matter how far you've run." She thought back to that first morning when she found Maple shivering and blindfolded, battered in the cold. She remembered her own hesitation, her fear of getting too close, risking another heartbreak. Now, looking at Maple asleep in the pasture under the stars, she understood. Their wounds had become bridges, not barriers. One particular afternoon lingered in Lila's mind. A group of teens from the local shelter arrived, most of them defensive and withdrawn. Maple stood at the fence, watching. A boy named Trevor, tall and quiet with a haunted look in his eyes, refused to go near the horses at first. He wandered the fence line, hands shoved deep in his pockets. But Maple followed him, always at a respectful distance, never pressing. Finally, after an hour, Trevor stopped. He looked at Maple, then at Lila, uncertain. Lila nodded, giving him permission to take his time. Maple waited. Eventually, Trevor reached out, just the briefest touch on Maple's mane, but enough. Lila saw the boy's shoulders relax, the tension in his jaw ease. Later, he told Lila in a small voice, "She didn't care about my scars. That was Maple's gift, to offer belonging with no judgment, to meet others where they were, to say without words, 'You are enough, just as you are.'" The community began to see Heartland differently, too. Local papers ran stories about the healing horse, about the rescued animals who, in turn, rescued others. Donations came in, small and large. Neighbors who had once doubted the mission now sent pies, blankets, handwritten notes. Lila realized that Maple had given Heartland more than a success story. She'd given it purpose, a new way to reach the wounded and lost. At the end of each day, Lila sat in the field with Maple, watching the sunset burn orange over the hills. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she just listened, to the wind, to the soft nickers from the barn, to her own heartbeat finally slowing after years of running. She knew there would always be challenges, setbacks, new scars. But there was a peace in knowing that here even the most broken souls could belong. In the quiet of dusk, as the world slowed and the sky deepened, Lila whispered her gratitude. Maple, grazing close by, lifted her head, eyes soft, and in that look was every answer Lila had ever needed. Healing, she realized, was never a straight line. It was messy, slow, demanding, sometimes painful. But it was always possible, with love, with safety, with time. Maple and Lila, two survivors, two teachers, had learned that together they could build a home where scars weren't just reminders of pain, but badges of survival, maps of where they'd been, and promises of where they could go. And Heartland itself became that place, a haven where everyone, no matter how wounded, could find a way to come home. The seasons cycled forward, as they always did. The air grew crisp, the trees at Heartland spilled golden leaves across the paddocks, and each morning the Colorado sky lit up with the promise of a new day. The barn was never truly silent anymore. There was always a gentle clatter, laughter echoing, the hush of voices sharing stories, and above all the steady presence of horses who had learned to trust again. In the middle of it all stood Maple, her brown coat gleaming, her once fearful eyes now warm with wisdom. On a bright Saturday, Heartland held its annual Fall Fair, a tradition Lila started years ago, but which this year felt entirely different. The place overflowed with visitors, families, veterans, children, and neighbors who'd become friends. There were pumpkin pies, hot cider, and a scattering of homemade signs welcoming everyone home. Maple stood in the main paddock, the unofficial guest of honor, as volunteers led new rescues in gentle demonstrations. People gathered at the fence, drawn by her quiet grace. For so long she'd been defined by her scars. Now she was the living proof that healing was possible. Lila sat beneath the newly grown willow tree by the gate, watching the fair unfold with a sense of awe and gratitude. Children ran in circles, their laughter rolling across the fields. Mrs. Singh's therapy group took turns brushing Maple, their hands confident and joyful. Even Trevor, the once shy teen, helped guide a smaller child, explaining how Maple listened not just with her ears, but with her whole heart. As the afternoon waned, Lila was invited to speak. She climbed the hay bale stage, looking out at the crowd, her friends, her community, and the horse who had taught her so much about patience and faith. She steadied her breath, feeling Maple's gaze from across the field, and began, "I used to believe that rescue was a one-way street," she said, her voice carrying on the wind. "That we, the lucky ones, saved the broken, whether animals or people. But Maple taught me something different. She showed me that when we open our hearts to those who are wounded or lost, we allow ourselves to heal too. Love and belonging, they don't erase our past, but they give our scars meaning. They teach us to transform pain into wisdom and wisdom into connection." She paused, letting the words settle, watching faces soften and eyes shine. "What matters most," she continued, "is not that we were once hurt, but that we are brave enough to keep coming home, to one another, to ourselves, again and again. Even the most frightened spirits can become teachers and healers, given the time, patience, and safety to grow." She looked at Maple, who stood quietly as a line of children took turns petting her soft nose. "If this story has touched your heart, I hope you'll share it. Follow Heartland, support our work, or simply remember this: every act of compassion, no matter how small, makes a difference, for animals and for us all." Applause swept over the field, and Lila felt a wave of warmth, joy that was humble but complete. She stepped down from the hay bale, finding Maple waiting at the pasture gate, as if she knew the moment belonged to them both. Lila walked out to the open field. The sunlight bathed everything in gold, and children played under the shadow of the willow tree. She stood with Maple in the pasture, letting the gentle quiet settle between them. For a while, neither moved. They simply breathed together, two survivors savoring the peace they'd built. A small boy approached, hand outstretched, his face uncertain. Maple bent her head, nuzzling his palm, her breath warm and sweet. The boy's mother watched, tears glimmering as her son smiled, a real, unguarded smile. In that moment, the lessons of the story lived and breathed. Trust given freely, the healing power of presence, the courage it took for both human and horse to meet one another, scars and all. Lila thought of the journey, how it began with a battered horse at dawn and a woman so tired she almost gave up. She remembered the setbacks, the nights of doubt, the long, slow return of hope. Now, Heartland was more than a rescue. It was a sanctuary, A living promise that wounds could heal, families could be rebuilt, and anyone could find their way home, no matter how lost they'd been. In the golden hush of evening, as the last visitors drifted away, Lila sat with Maple under the willow, their shadows long in the grass. "We did it," she whispered, stroking Maple's neck. "You're home, and so am I." She closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the barn, the laughter of children, and the soft rustle of leaves overhead. Her heart was full, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. The pain, the fear, the trust, the hope, it all belonged here. And so Maple became Heartland's legend, not as a warning about cruelty, but as a living testament to resilience. She was the horse who ran from pain and found her way back to love. Lila, in turn, learned that belonging wasn't a gift you gave. It was something you created every day by showing up again and again. If this story touched your heart, please follow our journey and share it with someone who needs hope. Remember, every act of compassion, however small, is a seed for change, for animals, for people, for us all. As the sun set over Heartland, Maple lifted her head, eyes shining, and nuzzled a child's hand for the very first time. Lila looked on, at peace, both of them finally, truly home.